On his unique leadership, both spiritual and temporal, the immense challenges Tibet faced, the diplomatic efforts, and his unwavering commitment to what's known as the middle way approach.
Right.
And really importantly, all of our insights today are drawn directly from the Dalai Lama's own recent reflections. So you're getting a firsthand account of these pivotal moments.
Exactly. And as we unpack this, you'll gain, we hope, a nuanced understanding of a geopolitical issue with really far-reaching implications, and maybe even find some inspiration for navigating your own complex challenges. So let's begin. Let's unravel this pivotal period.
Okay.
From a remarkably young age, the Dalai Lama's destiny was basically set. His responsibility for Tibet, it was placed upon him when he was just 2 years old.
Just 2. Incredible.
Yeah, and formalized when he became temporal leader at only 16, back in 1950.
And he describes this particular mission, this responsibility for Tibet as, well, unlike his other self-chosen paths like promoting human values or interreligious harmony.
Right.
He says this one has been much more difficult.
And you can see why. That difficulty became starkly apparent almost immediately. The communist Chinese invasion of Tibet in 1950.
Tibet appealed to the UN, but unfortunately got very little support from the major powers.
So what happened then?
Well, this precarious situation led to the signing of the 17-point agreement. That was May 23, 1951.
Okay, the 17-point agreement. But even though it was called an agreement, the sources make it pretty clear it was signed under duress. What exactly does that mean here?
It means the Tibetan representatives, they were subjected to coercion, insults, threats. I mean, real pressure.
Wow.
There were even instances of Chinese forgery of official seals to make it look legitimate.
Forgery. Okay.
Yeah. So the agreement, on paper, promised regional autonomy, religious freedom, cultural protection. And this was supposed to be the basis of the relationship until 1959.
Supposed to be.
But as the Dalai Lama points out, there's a fundamental contradiction, right? Accepting Tibet as part of China based on this agreement implicitly accepts the justification of conquest and, well, the validity of a coerced treaty.
So it's flawed from the very start.
Exactly. A key point of contention right from the beginning.
Okay. So despite this incredibly challenging start, there's a fascinating turn. The Dalai Lama was invited to Beijing in 1954.
For the National People's Congress.
He decided to go, even though there were deep concerns back in Lhasa.
Yeah.
He was hoping, to improve his people's situation.
And his initial impressions of Chairman Mao Zedong were surprisingly positive. Almost unexpectedly so.
Really? Like how?
Well, Mao apparently personally opened the car door for him. Said something like, "Your coming to Beijing is coming back to your own home."
Huh. That's quite a gesture.
It is. And what's truly remarkable here is the Dalai Lama's initial sort of affinity for certain aspects of Marxist economic theory.
Marxist theory? How so?
He was genuinely struck by its emphasis on equal distribution, on caring for the less privileged. He even described himself at one point as half Buddhist and half Marxist.
Wow. Half Buddhist, half Marxist. That's quite a blend.
He saw the ideals, opposing exploitation, striving for a society without national boundaries. He saw those as excellent ideals.
It's quite a revelation, isn't it? This major spiritual leader finding some common ground with an ideology often seen as, well, completely opposed to faith.
It really is.
What does that tell you about his core priorities, even back then?
I think it just underscores his unwavering focus on alleviating suffering, promoting equality, regardless of the ideological label.
Right, the practical outcome.
Exactly. For him, the outcome of caring for the less privileged, that transcended rigid political doctrines. It's a powerful insight into his pragmatic compassion.
But this initial optimism, it didn't last long, did it?
No, it was short-lived. Upon returning to Lhasa in March 1955, he believed he'd secured a firm promise of autonomy, but he quickly realized those promises were, in his words, empty.
So the efforts he tried to make, like setting up an independent judiciary, modern education.
Yeah, all those reforms, they were hopeless, basically.
Yeah.
Constantly undermined by the Chinese communist military and civil officials.
And his letters to Mao.
Went unanswered, according to the source. He even got this chilling warning from General Cheng Qingwu.
What was the warning?
The general explicitly referenced the brutal suppressions that had happened in Hungary and Poland, basically saying, don't resist.
Wow. That must have painted a really grim picture of what might be coming.
It certainly did, foreshadowing future repression in Tibet, absolutely. The situation was clearly deteriorating. It was setting the stage for, well, a fateful decision.
Okay, so fast forward slightly. November 1956, the Dalai Lama visits India for Buddha Jayanti. There, he meets Prime Minister Nehru, reaffirms his commitment to nonviolence at Kani's cremation site. That must have been powerful.
Deeply significant for him, yes. And amidst all the gathering dark clouds, he found some joyful and memorable moments visiting sacred Buddhist sites like Bodh Gaya and Rajgir.
He called them rare beams of sunlight.
Yeah, a brief respite. During this visit, he also had several meetings with the Chinese premier, Zhou Enlai.
And Zhu admitted some problems.
He did, apparently. Zhou admitted that major mistakes were made in eastern Tibet and promised reforms would not occur until my government thought the conditions were appropriate.
Vague timing there.
Very. And meanwhile, there was immense pressure on the Dalai Lama to actually stay in India, not go back.
From who?
His own brothers were urging him not to return. And there were even reports, unconfirmed but reported, that Zhou Enlai had hinted to Nehru about maybe resolving the McMahon Line border issue.
Ah, the disputed border.
In exchange for India refusing the Dalai Lama asylum. Sort of a political trade.
So, a lot of pressure to stay.
Yeah.
But he decided to go back.
He did. Influenced by Nehru's advice, apparently, and also relying on Zhou Enlai's promises.
Promises he later describes Zhu as just.
Simply lying.
Yeah.
Yeah, a decision he clearly came to regret trusting.
And upon his return to Lhasa in April 1957, the situation was, as the source says, slipping out of control.
Definitely. The International Commission of Jurists later confirmed the sheer horrors of atrocities happening in eastern Tibet.
What kind of things?
Awful things. Forced sterilization, crucifixion, vivisection, other unspeakable acts, just brutal repression.
My goodness.
And this brutality, this context, it fueled the popular uprising that finally erupted on March 10th, 1959.
Right. Thousands of people crowded Norbulinka Palace, his summer residence.
Yeah, preventing him from leaving, burning Chinese flags, shouting, "Tibet has always been free," a massive outpouring.
An incredibly tense, emotionally charged moment. So what was the final straw? The thing that made him decide to flee?
Well, on March 17th, 2 mortars actually landed near Norbulinka.
Okay, that's serious.
Yeah, intensifying the fear of an imminent full-scale attack. Then the state oracle, in a trance state, urgently commanded him, "Leave, leave, go tonight."
The oracle.
Yes, a traditional part of Tibetan state guidance. This, combined with his own divinations, the desperate urging of his advisors that led to the decision. He had to flee Lhasa.
And the escape itself sounds quite dramatic.
It was 10 p.m., March 17th, 1959. He steps out, disguised as a layman, a simple soldier.
Disguise.
He even took a bodyguard's rifle to complete the look, walked without his glasses, which must have been difficult.
Wow. And he recounts seeing the Patala Palace one last time.
Yeah, an emotional last glimpse from Chela Pass. He paused there and prayed that he would one day return.
Just heartbreaking. And then, tragically, just days later, the news arrived.
The Chinese army had shelled Norbulinka in the crowd outside. A massacre.
Horrible.
And on March 26, 1959, while still on the run but safe for the moment at Lunzizong, he formally repudiated the 17-point agreement.
Severing that coerced link.
Exactly. Finally, his arrival in India on March 31st, 1959. He describes a tremendous sense of relief, breathing the air of freedom.
India's welcome sounds like it was incredibly generous. Prime Minister Nehru sent a telegram, met him personally.
Yes, very supportive. And the Dalai Lama immediately issued a statement to the international media from Tezpur.
What did he say?
Announced his opposition to the Chinese occupation, appealed to free countries for support. This was really the moment to start rebuilding, but now in exile.
A huge task.
Absolutely. Yeah. The immediate work became caring for tens of thousands of refugees flooding into India.
Right.
He quickly established the Central Schools for Tibet and CST following Nehru's advice to ensure the kids got a modern education but also kept their cultural heritage.
Smart. And other institutions.
T1s, yeah.
Yeah.
The Tibetan Children's Village, TCV, was set up. The Library of Tibetan Works and Archives to preserve texts and knowledge, and monasteries began to reestablish themselves in exile, too.
Rebuilding a nation, essentially, outside its borders.
In many ways, yes. And in January 1960, the first big, formal gathering of Tibetans in exile happened in Bodh Gaya.
What came out of that?
They took the Great Oath of Unity, pledging to work together, all Tibetans from the 3 main provinces, for the common welfare under the Dalai Lama's leadership.
And
crucially, they decided to establish a representative government in exile, a democratic structure.
But while they were building this in exile, the situation inside Tibet remained grim.
Extremely grim. The Panchen Lama, the second highest religious figure, had stayed behind.
Yes.
In 1962, he courageously submitted this massive report, the 70,000-character petition.
70,000 characters. What did it detail?
It revealed a systematic destruction of Tibetan culture, language, customs, religion. He documented staggering numbers like a 97% reduction in monasteries, 93% reduction in monks and nuns. Just devastating.
What did Beijing think of this?
Mao Zedong himself recognized the threat. He described the petition as a poisoned arrow shot at the heart of the party.
So what were the consequences for the Panchen Lama for writing such a brave but damning report? And what about the broader Cultural Revolution?
For his courage, the Panchen Lama was imprisoned from 1964 to 1977.
13 years.
And subjected to horrible public humiliation through what they called struggle sessions.
Awful.
And this sadly just foreshadowed the full devastation of the Cultural Revolution itself, which really hit Tibet hard from 1966 to 1976.
How bad was it?
Everything Tibetan was attacked. The Jokhang Temple, the spiritual heart of Lhasa, severely damaged. Ganden Monastery, one of the main seats of learning, destroyed. Buddhist faith outlawed, traditional practices forbidden. It was, as our source puts it, a systematic attempt to erase its cultural identity.
Just erase it entirely.
That seems to have been the goal.
Okay, let's shift gears. After Mao's death, Deng Xiaoping emerges as China's paramount leader in 1978. Things change a bit.
A significant shift, yes. Deng extended an invitation to the Dalai Lama's brother, Gyalpo Thondup, in 1978 and made that now statement. But except for independence, everything is negotiable. Everything can be discussed.
Okay, that sounds like an opening. Did it spark hope?
It definitely did. Cautious hope, maybe, but hope nonetheless. There were some initial positive signs.
Like what?
Release of some Tibetan political prisoners. The India-Tibet border was opened, allowing some family visits after decades. Permission was given to send Tibetan language teachers from exile. And they were allowed to open a liaison office in Beijing. Fact-finding delegations were also dispatched to Tibet.
How were they received?
With an overwhelming outpouring of grief, according to the reports, and massive displays of support for the exiled leadership. It clearly showed the deep underlying feelings against the Chinese occupation were still there.
And there was also Hu Yaobang's slightly more liberal policy in Tibet around this time.
Yes, under Hu Yaobang, things eased a little. Religious practices started reappearing more openly. Some monasteries were allowed to reopen.
I was really struck by that story in the source about Lo Puan Law.
Ah, yes, the senior monk.
Spent 18 years in Chinese prisons. And when someone asked him what dangers he faced, he replied, "The danger of losing my compassion toward the Chinese."
It's an incredibly powerful reflection, isn't it? Sustaining basic human values, even in the face of immense suffering.
Truly profound. A real example of that resilience and moral compass that Dalai Lama always talks about.
Absolutely. Now, as these initial talks with Beijing didn't lead to much substantive progress, the Tibetan administration decided to shift strategy.
How so?
They decided to make their proposals more systematic, more formal, and present them on the international stage. At international forums.
Using the international community as leverage.
Or, as the Dalai Lama often puts it, their fourth refuge, alongside Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha.
The fourth refuge. Interesting.
And the U.S. Congress started showing more support around this time, condemning human rights abuses, urging direct talks between Beijing and the Dalai Lama.
And this strategic shift, it culminated in the 5-point peace plan in September 1987, right?
Exactly. The Dalai Lama addressed the U.S. Congressional Human Rights Caucus. He laid out 5 clear points.
Can you remind us what they were?
Sure. 1, transform Tibet into a zone of peace, a buffer between India and China. 2, China should abandon its population transfer policy, which was changing Tibet's demographics.
Okay.
3, respect for basic human rights and democratic freedoms for Tibetans. 4, restore and protect Tibet's fragile environment and stop dumping nuclear waste or deploying weapons there.
Crucial points. And the 5th.
5, start genuine negotiations on the future status of Tibet.
A clear blueprint.
Very clear. And building on this, the following year, June 1988, came the Strasbourg proposal.
What did that add?
It elaborated on the 5th point, really. It formally offered that Tibet would remain within the People's Republic of China.
So not independence.
Not independence, but with genuine autonomy. China would handle foreign policy and defense with a restricted military presence. This became the core of the middle way approach.
The middle way. So the goal was...
The strategic aim, in his words, was to find a way for both sides to make the Tibetans feel truly at home within the family of the People's Republic of China. It acknowledged Beijing's deep concern about territorial integrity.
Trying to find common ground.
Exactly. He even took a very pragmatic view, admiring the European Union model, where countries cede some sovereignty for greater collective flourishing.
Interesting comparison.
He believed that what matters is the presence of an adequate structure and framework that ensures the continued survival and thriving of a people with their unique language, culture, and identity.
So it sounds like a very reasonable, detailed proposal was on the table. A clear path forward, maybe. What went wrong? What became the major roadblock?
Well, the timing was difficult. Despite the Strasbourg proposal being put forward, protests had already erupted back in Lhasa in September 1987. And they happened again in 1988. This led to martial law being imposed in Lhasa.
So tensions were still high on the ground.
Very high. And then, of course, the world watched Tiananmen Square unfold in Beijing.
Spring 1989.
Right. April to June 1989. The Dalai Lama himself watched those student protests with a mixture of, as he put it, admiration, anxiety, and hope.
Did he comment publicly?
He did. He issued a statement of solidarity with the protesters on May 14, 1989, apparently against the advice of some of his own circle who worried about offending Beijing.
Sticking to his principles.
Yes. And then came the crackdown, June 3rd and 4th.
The human cost was just devastating.
Yeah.
What was the Dalai Lama's immediate reaction to that brutal suppression, and how did it affect his view of negotiating?
His reflections convey just profound shock and horror. He publicly stated his opposition, his shared sorrow. He saw it not just as a tragedy for the Chinese people, but as a stark illustration of the regime's reliance on force, not trust.
So it changed everything for the dialogue.
It basically brought it to an end. That process that had tentatively begun back in 1979, it was over. When he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize later that year, in December 1989, he spoke directly about Tiananmen Square, saying, "The spirit of freedom was rekindled among the Chinese people, but the door for talks had slammed shut."
A tragic outcome. But there was a surprising side effect, wasn't there? Empathy from some Chinese dissidents.
Yes, that's an interesting point. Some Chinese intellectuals and dissidents who fled China after Tiananmen began to express empathy for the Tibetan situation. The Dalai Lama met with figures like Yan Jiaqi and Wei Jingsheng, characterizing them as pro-freedom and pro-truth.
And the Nobel Prize itself must have raised Tibet's profile enormously.
Hugely. It brought extensive international attention to Tibet's nonviolent struggle. But paradoxically, how did Beijing's policy inside Tibet react to all this global attention, especially with freedom seemingly spreading elsewhere in the world?
Good question.
Yeah.
What happened?
Despite the global shifts, the Berlin Wall falling, dictatorships ending Chinese policy in Tibet actually tightened significantly in the 1990s.
Tightened.
Increased incentives for Han Chinese migration into Tibetan areas. An intense emphasis on political loyalty. A renewed struggle against splitism, meaning any assertion of Tibetan identity or autonomy.
So the opposite of the global trend.
Exactly. A real contrast. Yet, internationally, there was some movement. U.S. congressional resolutions in 1991 recognized Tibet as an illegally occupied country and affirmed the Tibetan people's right to self-determination.
And the U.S. created a special coordinator role.
Yes, the U.S. Special Coordinator for Tibetan Issues was established. And notably, throughout this, the Dalai Lama continued his pragmatic approach, supporting China's entry into the wider world community. He even supported most favored nation trading status for China.
Always looking long-term.
Always. But then came another really tragic development, didn't it? In 1995, the Panchen Lama controversy.
Ah, yes, the search for the reincarnation. A crucial religious matter for Tibetans. What exactly happened there? What was the fallout?
Yeah, the search for the 11th Panchen Lama is a deeply profound religious process. Using traditional methods, which included evaluating candidates provided by the head of the search committee inside Tibet, Gedril Rinpoche, the Dalai Lama confirmed a young boy, Gendon Chokyanima, as the genuine reincarnation in May 1995.
And the fallout was?
Terrible. The boy, who was just 6 years old, and his entire family were immediately detained by Chinese authorities.
Detained. Where is he now?
His whereabouts remain completely unknown to this day. He became effectively the youngest political prisoner in the world.
Unbelievable. And China's response?
The Chinese authorities then proceeded to select their own candidate, a boy named Gyaltsen Norbu, whose parents happened to be Communist Party members.
No.
They installed him as the official Panchen Lama.
Creating what Tibetans call a false Panchen Lama.
Exactly. It's a situation the Dalai Lama describes as causing him deep, deep sadness. A real tragedy for Tibetan Buddhism.
Okay, let's move into the new millennium. The Dalai Lama takes these major steps to institutionalize the Tibetan movement, right?
Yeah.
to make it less dependent on him personally.
Yes, crucial steps for the future. In 2001, when he was 66, he devolved his political executive authority. This led to the first direct election of the Khalon Trippa.
The head of government in exile.
Essentially, yes, their democratically chosen leader. Then, a decade later, in March 2011, at age 75, he fully retired from all political leadership.
Completely stepped down.
Completely. He stated very clearly that rule by kings and religious figures was outdated. He said he was voluntarily, happily, and proudly ending the temporal authority of the Dalai Lama.
Why did he feel that was so important?
His stated reason was explicitly, quote, to ensure the long-term sustainability of our struggle for freedom, to prevent the movement from becoming too reliant on any single individual, even himself, making it more resilient.
Makes sense. But despite this devolution, there was another attempt at dialogue, wasn't there? A final series of dialogues between 2002 and 2010.
Yes, formal discussions resumed for a period.
What was the core proposal from the Tibetan side this time? Was it still the middle way?
Very much so. In 2008, they presented a detailed memorandum on genuine autonomy for the Tibetan people. It reiterated their commitment not to seek separation or independence.
Still holding to that.
But to seek genuine autonomy compatible with the principles of autonomy in the Constitution of the People's Republic of China.
So working within China's own framework, what were the key points?
Key points included the integrity of the Tibetan nationality, meaning all Tibetan areas currently split across different Chinese provinces should be under a single administration, and genuine self-governance regarding their own language, culture, religion, education, and crucially, environmental protection.
So again, a clear, specific, and accommodating proposal. What became the major roadblock this time, and how did events on the ground play out?
Well, the fundamental problem persisted. The talks never really got beyond the United Front Work Department level in China, meaning they couldn't engage the actual decision makers, the top leadership in Beijing. It was like talking to middle management who couldn't make real commitments.
Frustrating.
Extremely. And then things exploded on the ground again in the run-up to the 2008 Beijing Olympics.
Right. A sensitive time for China.
Very. Spontaneous protests erupted in Lhasa and then spread right across the Tibetan plateau. The trigger was often brutal treatment of monks and nuns who were peacefully demonstrating.
And China's reaction?
Predictably, China's massive propaganda machine immediately blamed the Dalai Lama personally.
Of course.
Using really harsh language, calling him things like a wolf in monk's robes, a devil with a human face but the heart of a beast. Awful rhetoric.
And this had real-world consequences for ordinary Tibetans.
Absolutely. It led to increased racism against Tibetans living in the Chinese mainland, reports of discrimination in hotels, transportation, just general suspicion and hostility.
So tragic. How did the Dalai Lama respond to the protests in the Olympics?
He consistently appealed for nonviolence from the protesters. And he explicitly urged Tibetans not to try and hinder the Olympic Games, acknowledging it was a matter of great pride to the world's most populous nation.
Trying to de-escalate.
Yes. But despite these efforts, the formal dialogue process completely ended in January 2010. That was the last round.
And this period also saw that tragic wave of self-immolations starting, right? Beginning around 2009.
Yes, a truly desperate form of protest. The source calls it a tragic expression of the sheer desperation and hopelessness felt by many Tibetans under the tightening control.
The Dalai Lama himself had witnessed the first known instance back in 1998 with Thupten and Godup.
That's right. A very painful memory for him.
He seems incredibly conflicted about these acts, doesn't he? It must be a profound dilemma for a leader so committed to nonviolence.
He absolutely is conflicted. He states very clearly, I cannot encourage such drastic acts because I do not believe it will have any real effect on the Chinese authorities. But simultaneously, he says, the loss of every life is a loss too many. He also emphasizes that those who committed these acts chose specifically not to harm others, only to sacrifice their own lives in protest.
A terrible choice to feel driven to.
Indeed. And a recent case mentioned Swang Norbru in 2022. He was a popular young singer. After his self-immolation, his online presence was completely erased by authorities, and his father later committed suicide after intense harassment.
Grief.
It powerfully demonstrates that the grievances fueling these acts go way beyond just socioeconomic status. It's about cultural identity, freedom, dignity.
So, bringing us up to the present, what's the situation like today under Xi Jinping's leadership, given this long, difficult history?
The sources describe it in one word: Grim.
Grim.
Yeah, there's a definite tightening of control, intensified assimilation efforts, like those Mandarin-only boarding schools for Tibetan children, potentially up to 1 million kids.
1 million, aimed at erasing their language.
That's the deep concern. It's been condemned by the European Parliament, UN experts. The fear is it's separating children from their families, language, culture, religion.
What else is happening?
There's this new policy of direct control by the party over monasteries and nunneries. They're actually forcing Communist Party officials into the administration of religious institutions.
Party officials running monasteries.
Yes, and actively promoting a state-sanctioned, Sinicized version, Tibetan Buddhism with Chinese characteristics.
Wow.
Surveillance is pervasive. Community leaders, writers, anyone expressing Tibetan identity can be targeted. Displaying the Tibetan flag or even just a portrait of the Dalai Lama remains strictly banned, severely punished.
It sounds like they're trying to make being Tibetan itself the problem.
That's exactly how the source puts it. Tibetans are being made to feel that what is wrong with them from the Chinese authorities' perspective is simply that they are Tibetans.
Chilling. Let's broaden out from the immediate human cost. What about the wider geopolitical and ecological implications of China's presence in Tibet?
Huge implications. Geopolitically, the invasion created for the very first time in history a long, militarized border between India and China.
Which led to conflict.
Directly led to conflicts like the 1962 Sino-Indian War and ongoing border tensions ever since. Before 1950, Tibet was a peaceful buffer zone.
And ecologically, Tibet's role is massive, right? The third pole.
Absolutely critical.
Yeah.
It's the source of Asia's greatest rivers, the Brahmaputra, Indus, Mekong, Yellow River, Yangtze. These rivers are lifelines for hundreds upon hundreds of millions of people downstream in many countries.
And the Chinese occupation has affected these rivers.
Profoundly. The source talks about a devastating effect due to mass deforestation, like a 50% loss of forest cover estimated in the Kham region alone.
50%?
Yeah, and the construction of huge numbers of mega dams on these rivers. This risks major water conflicts downstream, pollution issues, changing water flows. It's a huge environmental concern for all of Asia.
And it's not just water, is it? What about minerals?
Tibet has vast mineral deposits. Copper, zinc, lithium, crucial for modern tech, even uranium. There's significant concern about a careless, instrumental, or mercantile approach to extraction. Exploitation without regard for the environment or local people.
And the traditional nomadic communities.
They're being forcibly settled, moved off their ancestral lands. This disrupts their traditional, often sustainable way of life, their symbiotic relationship with the fragile, high-altitude environment. It creates a deep imbalance.
And the source mentions nuclear concerns, too.
Worrying reports, yes, of nuclear missiles being stationed on the Tibetan plateau. The potential threat of pollution from any accidents or waste is just incalculable in that unique ecosystem.
It also highlights some profound ethical and, well, moral ironies in all this.
It really does. Think about it. China effectively acquired Tibet as a colony right after World War II. Precisely when the rest of the world, the old imperial powers, were supposed to be decolonizing.
A stark contrast.
And another stark contrast. China's major human rights abuses in Tibet started almost immediately after the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted by the UN in 1948.
Wow. The timing.
Yeah. And on that point, the Dalai Lama has consistently and firmly stood against arguments sometimes made about Asian values being different from universal human rights.
What's his stance?
He asserts forcefully that basic human rights are truly universal. Full stop. He says if any specific cultural aspects happen to conflict with fundamental human rights, then it's the customs that should be modified, not the rights compromised.
A clear, principled stand.
Absolutely. It's a core part of his enduring message to the world.
Okay, so given all this history, all this suffering, the Dalai Lama offers some really deep personal reflections on how he sustains hope, how he maintains his own inner peace through it all.
Yes, he does share some of his personal practices.
What a key one.
He emphasizes two things mainly. First, preparation. Hope for the best and prepare for the worst. He says this mental framing helps immensely when adversities inevitably strike. You're not completely blindsided.
Makes sense. Prepare mentally. What's the second?
Adopting a wider perspective. Don't get completely fixated on the immediate problem or suffering. Try to see the bigger picture.
How does he apply that to his own situation as a refugee?
Well, he says that being a stateless refugee, while incredibly difficult, actually brought him closer to reality. It offered unexpected opportunities for personal growth, for meeting diverse people from all walks of life.
And he even says it strengthened Tibetan Buddhism in some ways. Can you elaborate on that? How could exile possibly strengthen it?
Yes, it's a remarkable point he makes. It seems counterintuitive, but exile forced adaptation and innovation. For example, the establishment of the Gashima degree for nuns. It's a high academic honor, basically equivalent to a doctorate in Buddhist philosophy. Historically, it was denied to nuns in Tibet. It was fully developed and implemented in exile, empowering Buddhist women scholars.
That's groundbreaking.
It really was. Another example. Integrating modern science education into the traditional monastic curriculum. This dialogue between Buddhism and science has flourished in exile. So despite the immense loss and trauma, there was also adaptation and profound intellectual and spiritual growth happening.
Finding opportunity in adversity.
Exactly. But his ultimate core belief, the thing that seems to sustain him most, is to never lose faith in humanity.
Even towards those causing the suffering.
Especially towards them, in a way. He finds strength in staying connected to what he calls our own natural capacity to care for others, even those who inflict harm. It's rooted in Buddhist compassion training.
And he mentions specific practices.
He mentions his daily chanting of verses by the Buddhist master Shantideva. There are lines he recites like, "As long as space endures, as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain and dispel the miseries of the world." He says repeating this deeply reinforces his determination, his core motivation.
Wow. That's a profound commitment. So what does all this mean for the future of the Tibetan struggle?
Well, the Dalai Lama is very clear on one point. The resistance continues. In his view, the Tibetan people's resentment, persistent resistance in various forms, and moments of significant uprising have never gone away.
They still see the rule as foreign.
Yes, fundamentally. They continue to view Chinese rule as foreign, unwanted, and oppressive. That feeling hasn't diminished over decades.
And he expresses disappointment about the middle way.
Deep disappointment that Beijing has essentially chosen not to acknowledge this huge accommodation offered by the middle way approach. They offered to give up independence, asking only for genuine autonomy, and it wasn't seriously engaged with.
What about the future of the Dalai Lama institution itself? That's a big question mark for many.
It is. But he's addressed it directly. As we discussed, he already devolved all political authority to the elected leadership, the Central Tibetan Administration. That ensures the movement's continuity, the political struggle's continuity, beyond his lifetime.
Okay, so the political side is secured. What about the religious lineage, the next Dalai Lama?
He says the decision on whether the Dalai Lama lineage continues rests ultimately with the Tibetan people themselves, and according to their religious traditions. He has laid out clear instructions for how a 15th Dalai Lama should be recognized if the conditions are right and the people wish it. But he's also said if Tibetans feel the institution is no longer needed, it can end.
Putting the power with the people.
Exactly. And perhaps his most powerful message looking forward is his direct appeal to the Chinese people.
What does he say to them?
He appeals to his Chinese brothers and sisters to open your hearts to the ongoing plight of the people of Tibet. He reminds them quite profoundly that nations and countries belong to their peoples, not to their governments.
A call for people-to-people understanding.
Yes. And he holds this deep belief, this enduring hope, that ultimately time is on the side of the people, Tibetans as well as Chinese, who aspire for freedom. Why? Because, as he puts it, no totalitarian regime can last forever.
A powerful note of long-term optimism, despite everything.
Indeed. Grounded in a faith in human nature and the course of history.
Well, we hope this deep dive has offered you, our listeners, a comprehensive yet also quite personal understanding of the Tibetan struggle. It's really a story of resilience, of nonviolence, and that enduring quest for self-determination.
And as you reflect on everything we've discussed, maybe consider this profound paradox. You have a totalitarian regime that seeks to control every single aspect of society through force and surveillance, yet the Dalai Lama consistently posits that true, lasting stability can only come from trust, from consent, not from force.
What might this fundamental tension mean for the future of Tibet? And really, for any society grappling with that balance between freedom and control, it's something worth thinking about.
Definitely a provocative thought to leave you with. We invite you to continue exploring these complex issues. Keep learning, keep engaging, because understanding the human aspiration for freedom and dignity, well, that's a universal force that truly transcends borders and ideologies.